Being a new GM can be very stressful and intimidating to most gamers, and although no GM has all the answers to make it easy, if we can get little bits of information from various experienced GMs, our lives will be easier at the table. My name is Mike, and this is the GM's Vault, and today we're going to discuss 10 bits of advice primarily for new GMs just starting out, but could also benefit those GMs with more than a game or two under their belts. So, let's go see what knowledge is in the vault. Our first bit of advice is to realize that it's not the GM versus the players. Tabletop role-playing games are basically cooperative stories. The GM provides a rich and interesting world for the player characters to explore and places challenges in front of them so that they can become heroes. As a GM, we might have big plot ideas and amazing villains for our world, but it's important to remember that the players love their characters, and we as GMs should too. Give them challenges that will allow them to shine and really be the heroes of the story. With that said, it's important to point out that you shouldn't make an NPC the star, nor have a GM-played character unless it's absolutely necessary. Root for the PCs, but don't make it too easy on them. The second bit of advice may really come as a relief to many of you. You don't have to know all the rules. Behind me and on either side, I have literally hundreds and hundreds of RPG books. There's many I haven't even read yet. There are rules in almost all of these books. Even if I had read each book multiple times, I still wouldn't know every little rule for a given system. What you need to do is to have a good working knowledge of the basic rules, but not necessarily the specifics. Your players should know how their characters, spells, and abilities work, and if you have new players, it would be important to go through their character sheets with them so they know the special things that they can do in-game. Our third bit of advice plays off the last. Now, even though it's not necessary to know every single rule, you need to be prepared to make some judgment calls. If there's any ambiguity in the rules, you need to act as the arbitrator. A good rule of thumb is to allow characters to try and do anything that they want. Personally, I think even if it has a remote chance of success, they should be allowed to roll for it with appropriate penalties. You should probably talk to your players before the campaign starts during session 0 that it would be best if you had no rule books at the table during a combat encounter. Constantly looking up the rules breaks immersion of the combat. If there are questions, make your ruling and move on. Look up the specific rule after the session, and if you were wrong, be quick to admit it, correct it if needed, and then move along. The fourth bit of advice is keep it simple and start small. I'm a big believer in over-planning your world, but not your plot. Don't think that you have to have an entire year-long campaign all planned out before your first session with intricate plot twists and awesome villains. You're just going to get flustered halfway through the first session. If instead you focus on the village that they're starting in and make some cool NPCs with quirks and motivations and maybe a couple encounter locations outside of town, that's plenty to keep them busy for the first few sessions. Knowing the NPCs in town makes the session so much easier to improvise than taking the time to roll on some table and trying to look up some name of this particular shop owner. My fifth bit of advice is to shut up. Let your players do most of the talking. They should be talking about 75% or more of the time. Get them to talk by having NPCs ask them open-ended questions, meaning not yes or no questions. If we're really creating stories about the PCs becoming heroes, they should be taking the lead in the story. They should be providing most of the dialogue. And as the GM, you shouldn't constantly be giving long, drawn-out expositions on every minute detail of a noble's lineage, or overly describing each room in a castle when it's insignificant. When your players are talking, it is important that you listen and adjust your story based on what they think is interesting. If they start coming up with ideas of where this is all going, they may often come up with better, cooler ideas of what's going to happen next than you did. Number 6 on our list is to steal ideas. You need to read, watch movies, television shows, all for those little tiny story arcs, encounter ideas, interesting, cool NPCs, even the feeling of a certain place can come from anywhere. You can read the little synopsis on the backs of fantasy books at the library or bookstore for ideas. You should always try and carry a notebook or take notes on your cell phone, because if you're like me, you're going to forget after an hour or two that really cool idea. Check Instagram, Pinterest, you can do Google searches, and even skimming through the monster manuals. Man, there are a ton of different encounter ideas and plot hooks everywhere. The 7th bit of advice that I would have for a new GM is to find a GM mentor. I've found it invaluable to have at least one person outside of my gaming group to bounce ideas off of and help me with any problems that I may have had or have. Sometimes all you need is to put a thought into a coherent sentence in order to see what's wrong with it and how to fix it. There are plenty of Facebook groups that you can join to bounce ideas off of, to bring your vision more clarity and help with sticky situations. You can also find the GM's Vault on Facebook and on Twitter. Send me a message. I'd be happy to give you help out if I can. Number 8 on our list is know your monsters and villains. Not talking about memorizing every monster in the monster manual, but when you put a specific monster into an encounter, you should learn their abilities, their stats, their spells. You shouldn't be the one slowing down the encounter because you're the one looking up a spell list or checking how a certain ability works. And remember, the more monsters that you add to an encounter means the more that you have to know. So it's usually a good rule of thumb to have no more than 3 different types of monsters in any given encounter. Number 9, be descriptive in combat. During a combat encounter, you should try to give every attack roll even a 1-sentence description, a little narrative spin, and your combats will start to resonate with story. Have your monsters and villains trash talk your PCs. Your players will start to pick up on this, and they will become more descriptive in their role-playing as well. And last, and the most important bit of information, of course, is to have fun. There are few things better than hanging out with your friends, playing a game, and you're probably doing a better job than you think you are anyway. So what kind of advice would you have for brand new GMs? Leave a comment down below, leave a question, and stop back with us for more advice from the GM's Vault coming soon.